Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This episode features Tomokazu Matsuyama. Born in Japan, he currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York, and he received his MFA in Communications Design from the Pratt Institute in New York. Though he manages a dynamic, wide-ranging, and truly global practice that includes painting, sculpture, and large-scale public works, Matsu notably remains dedicated to furthering the most personal and intimate aspects of his aesthetic evolution. He has exhibited with Almine Wright Gallery in London, Sotheby's Hong Kong, Kavi Gupta Gallery in Chicago, Illinois, Long Museum West Bund, Shanghai, China, Harvard University, Katz and Arts Center at American University Museum in Washington, D.C., to name a few. Large-scale public displays of Matsu's works can be found all over the world, including a monumental permanent sculptural installation activating Shinjuku Station East Square, Tokyo, Japan, one of the busiest urban train stations in the world, and a sculptural installation at the heart of Ivy Station, a transformative mixed-use development project in Culver City, California, as another example. Matsu's works are in the permanent collections of Los Angeles County Museum of Art in California, Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, the Long Museum, Shanghai, China, Powerlong Art Museum, Shanghai, China, the Royal Family of Dubai, the Dean Collection, Swiss Beats and Alicia Keys, and the institutional collections of Microsoft, Toyota Motor Corporation, Bank of Sharjah, Nike, Japan, and Levi Strauss & Company, Japan. Enjoy this episode featuring Tomokazu Matsuyama, and please visit cerebralwomen.com for his expanded bio. Welcome to my podcast, Matsu. When did you discover your artistic passion?
That's a great question. It wasn't a decision, it was more of a transition. I have a little bit of interesting background where my undergrad was business management. I brought up in West Coast, America, a few years. And then throughout my life, I lived in Japan. I'm from a very rural background of lots of snow. So this living in the 80s, mid 80s in California, meeting surfing and skateboard culture against going back home and really getting into snowboarding. My college year was dedication to that athletic extreme sports. But it entailed lots of cultural aspect to the sports itself. And I got sponsored and I became a semi-professional. So I was kind of traveling around the world, doing some shoots, but then I got heavily injured. So the way I got into the art was that being injured and being hospitalized and having a surgery of a bone fracture, I thought, well, is there anything I can do for my entire life? And that was actually to be a little bit more creative as a visual artist. And that decision happened after my 20s. So I came to New York at the age of 25. I wanted to engage myself in graphic design and I did my master's, but for some reason it didn't click. So one day, being in Brooklyn, I went to an art store, Pro Paint in Canal Street in Chinatown. I just bought canvas, acrylic paint, and I went for it. And here I am 4 years now. I'm a full-time artist in New York City. So you never know how life goes.
And so if you hadn't found this passion, what other career path do you think you would have chosen?
You know what? I don't know if there was an alternative. I think I'm a little bit jealous to writers and musicians, more to the musicians, because being a painter, being a visual artist, we spend hours and months to create this one pictogram. And we don't have that sensibility of time inclusive to our creativity. So, being in New York, in the treasure of this cultural hub and going to see opera, ballet, you see all these things and performances, and you get so jealous. It's like, why can I not include the time frame? Of course you can when you have a solo exhibition, because you get to have a dialogue with the viewers for a specific amount of time, but it's not like there's emotion factor to the expression itself. So sometimes I wonder, like, if I wasn't a painter, I wish I was a musician.
So share with us the details of your practice. Define your practice for us.
I was brought up in the 80s in West Coast, as I told you a little earlier, and it was kind of the first generation of being in the United States and going back home, not as an expat, but my father just wanted to live here. And so going back to Japan, where there was a little bit of expat returning back to Japan, I was that first generation being mixed of American identity against my DNA, which is the Japanese identity. Now, coming back to New York 25, 23 years ago, starting art here, I felt multiplicity of minority. I didn't go to an art school, so I just bought and brush and paint, and I started painting. So I had no access to the art world, where I also found out this world was heavily white, masculine world. So how would a Japanese self-taught painter get into it? But, being in New York City, it welcomed me, having a voice, amplifying my own identity. So being an artist here in New York City was more of seeking who I am, but to also find who we are together. So my interest is really not about just discussing this Asian diaspora, because I don't fit into that, because I started art in New York City. So I feel myself more as a New Yorker than anything else. And the beauty of the city is nobody belongs here. So we get to say anything about who we want to be and who we need to be and what we want to represent. So as a proud minority, I want to try to find a way to bridge myself in this global community. Living in this informational age, we have so much we can share that nationalities and ethnicities and gender are exceeding the global communication that we can kind of host here in New York City. So my work is really about entailing, I guess, differentness and individualism and how we can become a global citizen.
And do you feel that Japanese art can be defined?
That's a great question. Visually, Japanese culture has an intense character to it. So coming from manga to Japanese traditional woodblock prints to its fashion, it has an iconic visual character. But it's not easy to talk about Japan because, when we talk about one culture, the way it makes it easy is that when you have a neighboring country or community or culture, Japan is completely isolated. So we call ourselves Galapagos, where we kind of build our own ecosystem. Culture kind of nurtures and develops when there's a chaos, where there's a confliction. But we never had that because we were never culturally invaded. Maybe America in the past, half century. But other than that, it's really hard to translate what Japanese culture is about. So the definition of that, I always kind of get lost in that translation. And also, it's hard for me to define what Japanese art is because half of my life I've been in the United States. So I think I can better talk about American art more than Japanese art.
So on that note, are your life experiences reflected in your work?
Very much. I am that type of citizen where third culture kids, as they call it, I feel Japanese, but I was brought up in the West Coast. And then going back to Japan again until I finished my undergrad, it felt like I was nomadic, but this loss of cultural identity was feeling lost. So, making art has always allowed me to understand myself, understand others. And, I felt like I'm the alter ego and my art is me more than anything else, pursuing art for over 20 years in New York City. So while my production and when I try to create a dialogue and communicate with the viewers or the world at large, I really have to define myself in this kind of bird eye view. So this response to my upbringing and being in New York, global melting pot for 20 years, is always this reflection of understanding us all together. Sorry, I'm not the best describer about this, but that's how I feel. And the city and creating art really educated me so much.
What aspect of your practice do you enjoy the most?
A lot of it is actually researching. My work is very detailed. Some works are very large. It could be 20 feet wide by 10 feet tall. And some of these work could be called as a tableau, spending months and months on it. But a lot of cases, I like researching because history represents our cultural heritages and cultural truths. But what I do is I sample a lot of imagery, and as a symbolism, I start to include the symbolic meaning of different era, different times, different ethnicities, all in one painting to see how the mix would navigate, to see the gray boundaries that we live in. I'm not talking about what's white or what's black, or I don't like to discuss about if it's decorative art or conceptual art, because ultimately decorative art can be a conceptual art. I don't want to talk about history because tradition is a repetition of innovation, that everything was innovative. It just over time, it became tradition. So the whole concept of my approach is that where is that in between section to really not have to talk about the opposing duality of how we see our world. And I think ultimately that is our time.
What materials do you use in your work?
I'm a multi-practiced artist. When I came to New York City 23 years ago, for the reason that I didn't go to an art school and I was a self-taught painter, I had no way to express myself to the public. So I've understood one day that I wasn't painting in New York City. I was only painting in my bedroom. So I've been in Brooklyn and Williamsburg, Greenpoint for 20 plus years. So one day I just decided that I need to use the community as a canvas. It wasn't doing street art. It was just more doing murals. So I knocked on some doors and say, hey, can I paint this mural? And the dialogue was very instant, meaning painting large murals. I was speaking to the community and I was painting at the community. And I needed to paint what I represent, what we represent. That initial act allowed me to bring my foundation. And therefore, I make large paintings, but where I showcase now is in somewhat known galleries or museums. But museums can be a very destined location. In cases when you pay admission, so few people can actually go and enjoy the work of art. So my other practice is that I do lots of public art, including sculptures. So I use materials such as stainless steel. I do large murals using acrylic paint, but also enamel paint. Working outdoors is unconditional, where a lot of cases, the artist can't actually decide the material, but the locations or the climate really decides how hard the material needs to be. That allowed me to learn a lot of new materials and approaches in art creating. So I've created very colorful aluminum sculptures to fiberglass sculptures to stainless steel mirror finish into 80 feet wide range mural from Beverly Hills, New York City, Tokyo, and so forth.
Early on, do you recall if you were influenced by any artist?
That's a great question. I'm overly influenced by a lot of people because this influence, I had to be very direct and be like a sponge in order to become a professional artist when I started at age of 20. So I wanted to listen, hear, and see and absorb everything I can in this city because we're in this global melting pot of creativity, right? Of course, I came to New York to pursue graphic design, but I was fascinated by this elegance of New York City. It was sexy. It was rock and roll. It was, their sense of danger in some way, right? So I love like the 60s and the 70s, the pop art kind of deliver Warhol to the great graphic design of Milton Glaser. The Pushpin Studios has nurtured the glamour of the graphic design era, and all these creative culture through music and theatrical graphic design and the corporate identities and in the pop art that delivered all together to be what's so-called American. But also coming to New York City, I've started to understand when I started art making that, who am I? So I kind of had to go to the Metropolitan Museum or Encyclopedic Museum to understand my own roots. And interestingly enough, the biggest influence was actually coming to New York and going to the Met, to the Japanese pavilion and seeing woodblock prints. Because starting myself as a self-taught painter, looking at the woodblock prints, I registered that there's only 6 color palettes. And therefore, the thinking of me learning how to use Photoshop and Illustrator and layers adapted to the work that was created 300 years ago. Everything was graphical, outlined, it was just colored. But the artwork that was being created felt like there was abundance of colors and layers of textures. And And therefore, coming here to learn graphic design and looking back my history of my own culture, very well connected. And that was for me staying in the gray zone in the midst of both ends. These things really influenced to start to build my own visual vocabulary and talk about our own history that we're building together.
Your work is so beautiful and colorful. I'm curious, what is your process of choosing color?
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's another great question. You know what I recognized earlier on when I started to make art? It's interesting. I showed my earlier on works to my friends back in Japan. They're like, wow, this looks like very pop art. And then, I showed to friends in New York City and they're like, wow, the color scheme seems to be very kind of Japanese subdued, like kimono patterns. And I was like, wow, okay. I start to understand, to learn that people either react to something very intimate and close and domestic or something that feels very distant and foreign. And then even these commentary that I get from my friends, I've understood that I have my dual identity in my own painting that I don't even recognize. And therefore, coming to the West Coast in the 80s and being influenced by like Looney Tunes and Disney I'm from this very traditional old town in Japan, surrounded by the cultural kind of heritages as kimono dyeing, sake brewery, and all these traditions. And therefore, I've understood that the subdued mid-tone colors come from there. So then after a while, it became an intention that I use very vibrant American kind of Looney Tune colors against the subtone colors. And although there are maybe 200-300 colors that I use in one painting, they harmonize in some sense. And I found that quite fascinating because I see myself through color, and color became my strongest language.
When you're creating, do you think about your audience or think about whether or not they'll understand your work?
It's kind of both, because you can never understand your audience because you never know who it reaches to. But I kind of do this shadow boxing style, like who do I want to present my work to? That way, it's almost like falling in love with somebody and you chase after that. Like, who do I want my audience to be for this artwork? And over time, you grow. The process of production allows you to grow. So then I like to keep building. Maybe this work audience would be to these people. And it's interesting to kind of create this weird dialogue that, having a dialogue to the people that really don't exist. They're kind of AI, virtual. And it sounds like it's almost like fake, like, going through Match.com and finding the right partner. But it worked. I think my work grew. And now, a lot of museums are interested in my work of the global dialogue that I create. It's been interesting to see that, when I first came here, the commentary of the word multiculturalism really dominated it. But I think with information technology, we know what's really happening at the world because we can achieve information instantly, right? Therefore, it's the other way around now. The world are really interested in what's happening with this chaotic situation, cultural condition in America. So when I talk about diaspora, I want to talk about how being in America, the diaspora of being in America at this day and age, we glamorize America all these years. And now with even this presidency, we're like, is America okay? Everybody, sends me messages like, how's America right now? And I know how to speak about that being non-American. I'm here as a legal alien. Of course, I have a green card. And I've gone through lots of different phases in this country. And I like to talk about it because, without America, I wouldn't have been here. I know so much about this country, what it has given me, and what I still reserve that I should get. And art really allows that because sometimes verbal communications, written communication can be a little bit violent. But the beauty of pictogram painting is that you get to understand with multi-perspective. And this is where I like to give out a statement, which is unconditional, which is slightly vague, but you find the symbolism that what it represents. But the verbs and nouns are placed in a way that you can read however you wish to read. And I love that because it's an open dialogue. It's truly a freestyle. It's like an open mic at a bar.
Do you listen to music while you're working?
Yes, I do. It depends what I listen to. Sometimes when I'm in a good zone, I listen to hip hop. If not, jazz, classics. Sometimes even just the news, what's happening in the world. Creating art is very emotional. So sometimes I just want to be dead silent. But my studio practice is very large. I have 30 full-time staffs. So it's really difficult to isolate myself. But at the same time, the creative juice with my team is here. So I enjoy this a lot. So sometimes music allowed to me isolated with my team. So it has a huge inspiration with me.
What are you excited about right now?
You know what? A lot of things. It took me 20 something years to have a voice visually that reaches to the world. And I think it's starting to happen. So, when you're active in New York City and when you have your own voice, what's going to happen is a lot of cases, your culture and country is going to want you back. So a lot of my showcasing had happened in Asia, a lot in Hong Kong, a lot in Shanghai, and other parts in Asia. And then gradually I came back to New York City, although I've been here 20 something years. Now a lot of things are happening in Europe and America back home. I do currently have a museum show up in Tokyo right now, which goes on until May 11th. But after that, my next exhibition is in June, and I'll be having in Hopper House. Hopper House is in New York and near Hudson and Nyack, where it was the upbringing home of Edward Hopper. And he was one of my biggest influence coming to New York, after coming to New York as well. So being part of his dialogue and having an exhibition at his home, I just kind of feel extremely honored. So very excited. And then going on from there, I have few museums showcasing in America. So very excited right now.
When do you know work is finished?
Right. It's almost like, how do you end love? It's interesting. It kind of tells, when you get in an argument with your loved ones, you don't know how to end it, but it just kind of, it ends. Either you go to bed the next morning, you speak as if nothing had happened, but then you felt something that it ends, right? That's a great question, because some of my painting could take like year and a half with my team. And they asked me this same question, like, Matsu, when do we end this? At a certain point, the work navigates me, as I said earlier. I feel like, when I'm zoning myself and creating a work that takes forever, it feels like the work is me and I'm the alter ego. But something kind of just clicks and tell me that, we can end this now. And it feel like, this is the part where I might feel like I'm more Japanese. It's almost like this meditative Zen, that at a certain point, there's a spiritual call saying, finish this work now. Like the call from Jedi or Yoda. But somehow it ends. And it's interesting, the years, the more staff that I have, I was against my studio to becoming a factory. So out of the 30 staffs, 10 is researchers or R&D, and only 1/3 is painting production. So I've been spending more and more time in each individual work. So it's been getting harder and harder to make that creative decision making, to call it the end, because I want to keep adding more and more. But somehow it finishes. We're not under a deadline, but I guess we are.
Are there thoughts or concepts that connect your work?
See, I was from a design background, so I don't enjoy working a finished work and then repainting that. If I know the end artwork is, it's really not worth making, although my work feels heavily like visual. So after development with my team, with my researchers, as long as I haven't sketched and maybe 30% of idea, I just go at it, because painting is a very process driven. And I like to keep adding and trial and error, because the longer you mingle with your painting, the paintings start to be more and more vocal about it. It's starting to reveal that your struggles and your positivity and your negativity is all in that one painting. So I enjoy that process becomes like a novel, and therefore the dialogue between the viewers develops and furthens and deepens. So yeah, great question with that. I don't know how things kind of develops, but I just keep adding until it feels right. It's like anti-cooking, the worst cooking is the taste doesn't taste right, so you're starting to add salt, pepper, vinegar, and it's gonna start to taste very ugly and horrible and disgusting. But I guess with art making, it ends to be a good, delicious taste. So I think I found that enjoyable.
So when do the titles of your work enter the creative process?
Thanks. That's a great question. I don't title my works, although they have a title. So basically what I do in my work, the recent works are called Fictional Landscape. So it's a mixture of different cultural appropriation through existing imagery. Some images could be Japanese traditional folding screens or Chinese traditional painting from centuries ago, Or it could be an imagery that I find in newsstand from fashion magazines such as Vogue or interior magazines such as I see in Elle Decor or Architectural Digest. It's really the assemblage or sampling or appropriation of multiplicity. Can they represent the reality where my imagery are making surreal? So if I title the piece, the whole concept of that is that being objective to the resources that I gather together. So music being my biggest influence, when I title the piece, what I do is I wanted to do it in the same manner where I would go to my iTunes library and I would start elaborating multiple song titles together to sound like a title. So if I were to go to section B in my iTunes library, I would see Beatles or Beastie Boys or Billy Joel, and then just maybe 3 song titles, I would mix them together. And then if it sounds like it's a title, then I would just name that to my artwork. So that being said, I already have 20 titles for my upcoming paintings.
Is there a connection between the words and the paintings?
There actually is. So let's say it's not like I have the 20 titles in a row. When I finish a work, I have these fractions of ideas that I want to transcend as a message. And I don't want to kind of pigeonhole that with a title. So these assemblages of the song titles, when I see the painting out of the 20 titles, there are one that really makes sense. It's like, there's a kind of a gradual connection, a vague connection that becomes a statement, so that there's a little bit of a space for the viewers to consolidate the meaning of the painting itself and the dialogue behind it.
You're even super creative even when it comes to the titles, which is interesting.
Thank you. Painting can be such a strong statement, and it can be a propaganda for anybody, any culture. It doesn't have to be political or religious. So for me, it's really the interconnection and connection with the world, because as I said earlier, coming to New York City has only been a positive thing, but everybody has this struggle in this competitive New York City. So connecting with each other and creating a voice together has been my own existence of presence in being in New York City. So I guess, the title of coming up with the music was, I felt awkward like titling my work because it felt like I was forcing a message. And I think, listening to the music while I paint and just coming up with this theme was like, this might make sense. And I tried it out and I think it did well.
What do you feel is the purpose of art?
Education. There's a lot of things that we don't know and it doesn't reach to our ears because, of course, we like to be in a community. When we fit into our own community that we feel comfortable, not every information comes to us because it's a stressful world. But there's always space to learn. The world doesn't happen and the world doesn't exist without 2 different opinions. So the art allows to bring in these opposing opinions. For instance, Israel and Palestinians, they both have a voice. So it's important to listen to both ends and really to understand and grasp rather than just kind of grasping what the media is saying out loud. And I think this country in New York City specifically is the hub to learn all this. And therefore, I think art really serves as a deepening of organic education and learning about each other. And I love that.
I've really enjoyed our conversation, and this is our last question. How do you want your work to impact the way people think?
I can so little impact somebody, but I want somebody to see my work and think about it a little bit. And if they would show it on Instagram or try to find a way to discuss about the meaning of our existence, that's a huge bonus. Because finding about ourselves, it's so uneasy now because we can forge ourselves through social media. We can idealize ourselves. And we lose so little time in finding ourselves in this day and age. And I think it's very important. I came to New York before all the information technology, before social media and iPhone. So every information we had to invest our time to find. And therefore, the distance between who we can become and information that we achieve, which really makes that rooted down to who we are, was more rather inefficient and not rational. But therefore, I think it's very important that art has that function still. It's a very analog. It's very organic. It's very loose. And you need to, invest your time to really understand what art is. But therefore, I think it's very meaningful. And I feel very honored that I'm a professional artist in the 21st century.
Art will save us, and thank goodness we have artists. So thank you for everything you do.
Can I also give one more comment with that? Before COVID, it's interesting when the world's happy, we want to see a documentary reality in a lot of cases. It's striking when you reveal the darkness of a real world. After COVID, we wanted hope. And I've always painted uplifting positivity, what life is about, because being in New York City was a struggle, but it was a happy struggle that I enjoyed. And I wanted to kind of compete against to remain my self-esteem. And now with my work, I think I get to reach the world that we have hope in our world, in our life. I don't know if I can really save the world. I can't, but I can save individual that we have a bright future upcoming in front of us. And New York really given me this. So I'm a proud citizen.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.